Security guards. What's the most disturbing thing you've seen on surveillance footage that the company told you to forget? I've been working security for Meridian Corporate Plaza for 3 years. Night shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., watching dozens of monitors in a windowless basement room that smells like stale coffee and industrial carpet. Most nights, it's just employees working late, cleaning crews, emptying trash bins, and the occasional raccoon setting off motion sensors in the parking garage. But 6 months ago, I saw something that still keeps me awake every single night. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday when I noticed unusual activity on the 14th floor. Meridian Industries, the building's main tenant, had that entire floor, and it was supposed to be completely empty after business hours. But there were lights on in the main conference room, and I could see multiple figures moving around inside. I zoomed in with the PTZ camera, adjusting the focus for maximum clarity. 6 men in expensive suits were standing around a large mahogany table covered with documents and other items. At first, I thought it was just a late-night business meeting. Rich executives pulling all-nighters wasn't uncommon in this building, especially during quarterly reporting periods. Then I saw what was actually scattered across the table: stacks of cash. More money than I'd ever seen in one place. Hundreds and hundreds of bills bound with rubber bands. One man was counting it methodically, while another was recording everything with professional camera equipment. But that wasn't even the most disturbing part. The most disturbing part was the photographs. Scattered between the money were dozens of photographs, all of children. Young kids, maybe 8 to 12 years old, smiling innocently at the camera. The men were pointing at different photos, having animated discussions while examining each image carefully. One man picked up a photo, showed it directly to the camera, and nodded approvingly before setting it aside in a separate pile. My stomach dropped like I'd been punched. This definitely wasn't any legitimate business meeting. I immediately started recording the surveillance feed on my personal phone, my hands trembling as I held it steady. Whatever this was, I knew I needed solid evidence. I zoomed in as much as possible, trying to capture clear images of faces, license plates from the garage cameras, anything that could help identify these men later. At 3:15 a.m., they started packing up systematically. The money went into multiple briefcases. The photos were carefully sorted into manila envelopes with handwritten labels. They cleaned the conference room methodically, wiping down surfaces with disinfectant like they were deliberately covering their tracks. The next morning, I went straight to my supervisor, Randy Kowalski. I showed him the footage and explained exactly what I'd witnessed during the night shift. Randy's face went completely pale as he watched the recording on my phone. "Where's the original surveillance file from the server?" he asked nervously. "Still backed up automatically," I said. "Everything gets stored for 30 days minimum." He nodded slowly and told me to write up a detailed incident report. "We'll handle this through proper channels," he assured me with what seemed like genuine concern. 2 days later, Randy called me into his office with a serious expression. "About that footage from Tuesday night," he said, deliberately avoiding eye contact. "The client reviewed everything thoroughly and confirmed it was a completely legitimate business meeting. Some kind of charity auction planning committee." "Charity auction?" I stared at him in disbelief. "Randy, there were stacks of cash and photos of children being sorted. The matter is officially closed," he cut me off firmly. "And frankly, I think you seriously misinterpreted what you saw. Night shifts can play tricks on your mind sometimes." That's when I knew something was seriously wrong with this whole situation. I went to check the surveillance server myself that afternoon. The footage from that night was completely gone. Not just deleted, it was like those critical 3 hours had never existed. Even the backup files had been wiped clean. Randy made it crystal clear that discussing this incident with anyone, police, other employees, family members, anyone, would result in immediate termination and potential legal action for violating strict client confidentiality agreements. But I still had my phone recordings safely stored. That night, I went home to my small one-bedroom apartment and made multiple copies of my phone footage. I uploaded it to 3 different cloud accounts with strong passwords, burned it onto several DVDs that I stored in different locations, and mailed a USB drive to my brother in another state, along with a detailed letter explaining everything I'd witnessed. If something happened to me, at least the evidence would survive to help those children. For weeks afterward, I tried desperately to convince myself Randy was right about what I'd seen. Maybe I had misunderstood what was happening in those grainy surveillance images. Maybe the photos were headshots of child actors for some commercial production being filmed in the building. Maybe the cash was props for a movie or television show. Maybe my sleep-deprived mind, working too many consecutive night shifts, had created sinister connections that weren't really there. But deep down, in my gut, I knew exactly what I'd witnessed that night. The way those men had handled the photographs with such practiced efficiency, the careful organization of everything on that conference table, the professional recording equipment, the systematic way they'd cleaned up afterward. This wasn't some innocent business meeting or charity planning session. I started having nightmares. In them, I could see the faces of children staring back at me from those photographs, their innocent eyes pleading for help that never came. I'd wake up in cold sweats, checking my phone to make sure the footage was still there, still real, still proof that I hadn't imagined the whole horrific scene. The breaking point came exactly 3 weeks later when I witnessed something that made me physically sick to my stomach and changed everything. It was another Tuesday night, same exact time, 2:47 a.m. on the dot. The 14th floor conference room was lit up again with the same bright fluorescent lighting. This time, there were 8 men instead of 6, but I recognized several faces from the previous gathering. They wore the same expensive suits, carried the same briefcases, moved with the same practiced efficiency. The same ritual was taking place. Money neatly arranged on the table in organized stacks, photos spread out in carefully planned rows, intense discussions conducted in hushed tones while pointing at specific images and documents. But this time, they definitely weren't alone. A man in a security uniform, definitely not from our building, someone I'd never seen before, escorted a young boy into the room through a side entrance I'd never seen used during my 3 years working there. The kid couldn't have been older than 10, with dark hair and the most terrified eyes I'd ever seen. He looked absolutely terrified, clutching a small backpack against his chest like it was his only protection in the world. The men gathered around him like predators circling wounded prey, studying him with the same calculating expressions they'd used while examining the photographs. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and started recording everything, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode in my chest. I watched in absolute horror as one of the men handed over a thick envelope stuffed with cash to the security guard, who nodded professionally, like this was just another business transaction, and left the traumatized boy behind with these monsters. The kid just stood there frozen with fear, tears streaming down his face while these sick individuals discussed him like he was merchandise at an auction. They pointed at documents spread across the table, made calculations on expensive calculators, and spoke into their phones while gesturing at the terrified child who clearly had no idea what was happening to him or what his future held. They took photos of him from different angles with professional equipment. They measured his height. They examined his teeth like he was livestock being appraised for sale. The whole scene was so dehumanizing, so evil, that I felt bile rising in my throat. I couldn't bear to watch anymore. I had to do something immediately, regardless of the consequences. I called 911 from my personal phone, trying desperately to keep my voice steady and professional, despite my racing heart. 911, what's your emergency? I'm a security guard at Meridian Corporate Plaza downtown on 5th Street. There's a child being held against his will on the 14th floor of this building. I think it's human trafficking or kidnapping in progress. The dispatcher kept me on the line while emergency units were dispatched to my location. She asked detailed questions about what I was seeing, how many perpetrators were involved, whether I could see any weapons. I stayed glued to the monitors, watching the conference room with growing dread and anxiety, giving her a play-by-play of everything happening. 20 minutes later, I saw the reflection of police lights off the glass buildings across the street as multiple squad cars entered the underground parking garage. I watched them on my security cameras as officers rushed through the lobby toward the elevators. But here's what still haunts me every single night. Those men somehow knew the police were coming before they even arrived at the building. Before the officers even reached the elevator bank in the main lobby, the conference room went completely dark. I watched in amazement as the men moved with military precision, packing everything up in under 2 minutes. By the time police gained access to the 14th floor and managed to get into the locked conference room, it was completely empty. No men, no money, no evidence of any kind, and most importantly, no little boy. The responding officers took my detailed statement and examined my phone footage, but without physical evidence or additional witnesses, there wasn't much they could legally do. They seemed sympathetic, but explained that the building's main surveillance system showed absolutely nothing, just empty conference rooms all night long, according to the official digital records. Are you sure about what you saw? Officer Martinez asked me gently. These are very serious allegations. I showed him my phone footage again, but the quality wasn't great, and the images were somewhat grainy. You could see figures moving around, but you couldn't make out specific details or identify faces clearly. I know what I saw, I insisted. There was a child up there. They had photos of other children. This is some kind of trafficking operation. The officers exchanged glances. We'll file a report and keep this on file. If anything else happens, call us immediately. When Randy arrived exactly 1 hour later, he was absolutely furious with me. His face was bright red, and his hands were shaking with rage. You called the police without proper authorization? He yelled, getting right up in my face. Do you have any idea what you've done? What this could potentially cost the company in legal fees, reputation damage, and lost contracts? There was a child being held against his will up there. There was absolutely nothing. He cut me off harshly. You're clearly having some kind of serious mental breakdown. The stress of night shift work affects different people in different ways. He paced back and forth behind his desk like a caged animal. Effective immediately, you're on administrative leave pending a mandatory psychological evaluation. You cannot return to work until a licensed psychiatrist clears you for duty. He confiscated my security badge, my radio, my building access card, and even my parking pass, then personally escorted me out of the building like I was some kind of dangerous criminal who couldn't be trusted around other people. As we walked through the lobby, I noticed how other employees stared at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Word had obviously already spread about the incident with the police. Tommy, Randy said as we reached the exit, his voice suddenly becoming calm and almost friendly. I want you to understand that I'm looking out for your best interest here. Sometimes the mind can play tricks on us, especially when we're working alone in the dark for long periods. I know what I saw, Randy. He put his hand on my shoulder in what seemed like a paternal gesture. Get some rest. See a doctor. We'll get this all sorted out. The next morning, I tried calling Detective Rodriguez, the officer who'd taken my statement the night before. When I finally reached him, his tone was noticeably colder than it had been in person. Mr. Davis, I've reviewed your statement and the footage you provided. The case is being officially closed due to complete lack of evidence. But what about the child I saw? There's no evidence any child was in that building last night. And I should warn you that filing false police reports is a serious crime that could result in criminal charges being filed against you. The line went dead. That's when I realized just how deep and extensive this conspiracy actually went. They had people in the police department too. I spent the next 2 months obsessively researching Meridian Industries and everyone connected to the building's ownership and management. I barely slept, barely ate, spending 14 hours a day digging through public records, corporate filings, news articles, and social media accounts. On the surface, they looked completely legitimate. Real estate investments, corporate consulting services, charitable foundations with impressive donor lists and glowing testimonials. But the more I dug into their background and financial records, the more suspicious connections I found to shell companies, offshore accounts, and businesses with no apparent legitimate purpose. The building's owner, Patricia Meridian, was the widow of a tech billionaire named Douglas Meridian, who died 5 years earlier in what was officially ruled an accidental drowning. She sat on the boards of 3 different children's charities and had been photographed at high-profile fundraising events with senators, federal judges, district attorneys, police commissioners, and other prominent political figures. But her late husband had been under federal investigation for money laundering and financial crimes before his very convenient death in a mysterious boating accident off the coast of Miami. The investigation had been quietly closed after his death, with all records sealed. I also discovered that Meridian Plaza wasn't the only property they owned. The company controlled similar buildings in 6 other major cities: Atlanta, Phoenix, Seattle, Denver, Houston, and Detroit, all with the same basic architectural layout: isolated upper floors, minimal security coverage in certain strategic areas, private parking garages with restricted access, and service elevators that bypassed normal security checkpoints. Each building was managed by a different subsidiary company, but when I traced the ownership through multiple layers of shell corporations, they all led back to the same offshore account in the Cayman Islands. But I needed much more than just internet research and public records. I needed inside information from someone who really understood what was happening and had direct experience with this organization. That's when I remembered Trevor Kowalski, Randy's younger brother and a former co-worker who'd quit Meridian 6 months before I was hired. Trevor had worked the same night shift position I now held, but he'd always seemed nervous and evasive when people asked why he left such a good-paying job with excellent benefits and advancement opportunities. I found him working at a small mall security booth across town, looking tired and constantly checking over his shoulder like he expected trouble at any moment. When I approached him during his dinner break, his face went completely white with fear. "I can't talk to you," he said immediately, looking around nervously. "Not here, not anywhere. You need to leave immediately before someone sees us together. Trevor, I know what's happening on the 14th floor. I've seen it with my own eyes." He grabbed my arm firmly and pulled me behind the security booth, completely out of sight from the mall's extensive security camera network. "You need to stop digging into this right now," he whispered urgently. "They have people everywhere. Police departments, prosecutors' offices, judges, social workers, child protective services. Kids who cause problems or ask too many questions just disappear completely." His hands were visibly shaking as he spoke. "What exactly did you see when you worked there?" I pressed him for details. He was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with whether to trust me with information that could get us both killed. Finally, he pulled out his phone and showed me a photo he'd saved. It was a missing child poster, an 8-year-old girl named Isabella Chen who'd vanished from foster care 3 months ago. "I saw her," he said quietly, his voice barely audible, "in that conference room, the night before I quit my job and never looked back." Trevor explained that he'd tried to report it through what he thought were proper channels, just like I had attempted. He'd gone to his supervisor, Randy, and shown him footage of what he'd witnessed. Randy had seemed concerned and promised to handle it through appropriate channels. But within 24 hours, Trevor was fired for alleged theft. Money had mysteriously disappeared from the building's petty cash drawer, and security cameras supposedly showed him taking it, though he'd never even had access to that area or the combination to the cash box. When he tried to fight the false accusation and clear his name, he was arrested on completely fabricated charges of embezzlement and fraud. He spent 3 days in jail before a lawyer his family couldn't afford managed to get the charges dropped due to lack of credible evidence. But his reputation was completely destroyed. No security company would hire him, and he'd been effectively blacklisted from most legitimate employment opportunities. Even retail jobs wouldn't hire him once they ran background checks and saw the arrest record, even though the charges had been dropped. "They made it very clear what would happen if I ever talked about what I saw that night," he said, his voice shaking with genuine fear. "My sister lives just 2 blocks from here with her 3 young kids, ages 5, 7, and 9. They made absolutely sure I knew exactly where she worked, what school the kids attended, what time they walked to the bus stop every morning, what route they took home." He pulled out his wallet and showed me a photo of 3 beautiful children, 2 boys and a girl with bright smiles and innocent eyes. They sent me this photo in the mail 2 weeks after I was fired, but it wasn't a photo I'd taken. Someone else had photographed my niece and nephews without my sister's knowledge. On the back was written, "Beautiful children. It would be a shame if something happened to them." My blood ran cold. These people weren't just traffickers. They were terrorists who used fear and intimidation to maintain their operation. Trevor reached into his pocket and handed me a business card, completely blank except for a phone number written in pencil. "If you really want to stop this nightmare and help those kids, call that number. But I'm warning you, once you do, there's no going back to your normal life. They'll come after you with everything they have. They'll destroy your reputation, frame you for crimes you didn't commit, and threaten everyone you care about." He looked around nervously one more time. "And if that doesn't work, they'll just make you disappear like you never existed." That night, I sat alone in my apartment staring at that card for hours, weighing my options carefully. I thought about the little boy I'd seen, probably already sold to the highest bidder somewhere across the country or even internationally. I thought about Isabella Chen and wondered how many other innocent children had vanished into this nightmare without anyone even noticing they were gone. I thought about Trevor's sister's kids and what these people were clearly capable of doing to protect their lucrative operation. I thought about my own family, my elderly parents, my brother and his wife and their 2 young daughters. But I also thought about those terrified eyes of that little boy standing alone in that conference room surrounded by monsters who saw him as nothing more than a commodity to be bought and sold. At exactly 3 a.m., I finally made the call that would change everything. Agent Morrison, FBI Financial Crimes Division. Her voice was alert and professional despite the early hour, like she was accustomed to receiving calls at all hours of the night. I explained everything in meticulous detail: the surveillance footage, the missing children, the systematic cover-up, Trevor's story and what had happened to him when he tried to report what he'd witnessed. I told her about the police department's refusal to investigate, about Randy's suspicious behavior, about the pattern of buildings in multiple cities. Agent Morrison listened intently without interrupting, occasionally asking for clarification on specific details or requesting that I repeat certain information. "Can you meet tonight?" she asked when I finished my account. "And bring that phone footage with you. Also bring any documentation you've gathered about Meridian Industries. Is it safe to meet? They seem to have people everywhere. We'll take precautions. There's a 24-hour diner called Murphy's about 30 miles outside the city on Route 9. Can you be there in 2 hours?" We met at Murphy's Diner, a small place that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. Agent Morrison was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s with tired eyes and graying hair that suggested she'd seen far too much human evil in her career. She was sitting alone in a corner booth, wearing jeans and a plain sweater, looking like any other customer grabbing a late-night meal. But I noticed she'd chosen a seat where she could see both entrances and had a clear view of the parking lot. "Mr. Davis?" she asked as I approached. I nodded and sat down across from her. She immediately pulled out her FBI credentials and showed them to me. "Thank you for calling. We've been building a case against this network for almost 2 years, but they're extremely careful and very well connected politically. Your footage might be exactly the break we've been desperately waiting for." She signaled the waitress and ordered coffee for both of us, then pulled out a thick file from a briefcase. "Before we look at your footage, I want to show you something." The file was filled with photos of missing children, dozens of them. Boys and girls of various ages, all smiling innocently at the camera in what looked like school photos or family snapshots. Each photo was paperclipped to a missing person report, with details about when and where they disappeared. These children have all vanished in the past 3 years from cities where Meridian Industries owns buildings similar to the one where you work. Foster kids, runaways, children of illegal immigrants, kids who wouldn't be missed quickly or might not be missed at all. She flipped through page after page of faces. So many innocent children, all gone without a trace. We estimate they've successfully trafficked over 200 children in the past 5 years alone, but that's probably a conservative number. Many disappearances are never even reported. Why haven't you been able to arrest them before now? Agent Morrison's expression darkened. Because every time we get close to building a solid prosecutable case, evidence mysteriously disappears from police departments and witnesses either recant their statements or simply vanish completely. They have judges and prosecutors on their payroll in multiple jurisdictions. Entire police departments have been compromised in some cities. She leaned forward across the table, her expression intense. They're not just traffickers, Mr. Davis. They're running a sophisticated criminal enterprise with connections to organized crime, corrupt politicians, and international trafficking networks. The money involved is staggering. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars annually. I showed her my phone footage, and she watched it intently several times, occasionally pausing to examine specific details. "This is good," she said finally. "But your footage is different from anything we've had before. It's time-stamped, unedited, and shows clear criminal activity in progress with multiple perpetrators. With this evidence, we can get federal warrants that bypass all the local corruption." She pulled out a small recording device. "I need you to tell me everything again from the beginning, for the record. Don't leave out any details, no matter how insignificant they might seem." For the next hour, I recounted everything I'd witnessed, everything Trevor had told me, and all the research I'd done into Meridian Industries. Agent Morrison recorded it all and took detailed notes. "Here's what we're going to do," she said when I finished. "You're going to go back to work at Meridian. I'll arrange for your supervisor to mysteriously reverse his decision and reinstate you." "How can you do that?" "Randy Kowalski has some financial irregularities in his background that he wouldn't want his employers to know about. Sometimes a friendly conversation about tax evasion can change someone's perspective." She handed me a device that looked like a regular cell phone charger. "This is a sophisticated recording device that transmits everything to our secure servers in real time. Even if they confiscate it or destroy it, we'll have all the evidence backed up automatically." She also gave me a special phone that looked identical to my regular one. "Use this for all your normal activities. It has GPS tracking so we can monitor your location 24/7. If you're in danger, press the power button 3 times quickly, and we'll have agents at your location within minutes." Agent Morrison leaned back in the booth. "I won't lie to you. This is extremely dangerous. If they suspect you're working with us, you'll disappear just like the others. We've already lost 2 undercover agents in this investigation. One was found dead in what looked like a suicide. The other simply vanished without a trace. What about my safety? How will you protect me if things go wrong? We'll have armed agents monitoring your exact location 24/7 through GPS tracking and surveillance, but you need to act completely natural. Keep doing your job exactly like nothing happened. Don't change any routines, behaviors, or social patterns that might make them suspicious. She handed me a business card with just a phone number on it. If anything feels wrong, if you sense any danger at all, call this number immediately. It goes directly to a tactical response team that can be at your location in under 5 minutes. 2 weeks later, just as Agent Morrison had predicted, Randy called me with surprising news. Tommy, I've been thinking about our situation, he said, his voice friendly and conciliatory. Maybe I was too hasty in placing you on leave. Night shift work is stressful, and we all see things differently when we're tired. So I can come back to work? Absolutely. In fact, we're giving you a raise, an extra $2 an hour for your dedication and loyalty to the company. I wanted to ask him what had changed his mind, but I knew better than to push my luck. That Tuesday night, I was back at my familiar security desk, watching the same monitors in the same windowless basement room, but now I had a completely different purpose and sophisticated recording equipment hidden in my uniform. The first few nights were quiet and routine. I documented everything I could safely access: shift schedules, building access records, which employees had clearance for the 14th floor, maintenance schedules, cleaning crew rotations, delivery schedules, visitor logs. I memorized faces and license plates, noting specific patterns in when these men arrived and left the building. I also started mapping out the building's layout more carefully, looking for hidden entrances, service corridors, and areas that weren't covered by the main security camera system. I discovered that there were several blind spots in the surveillance network, particularly around the service elevators and loading docks. Agent Morrison had given me detailed instructions on what to look for and document. She wanted evidence of financial transactions, documentation of the trafficking operation, identification of all participants, and proof of the systematic cover-up. On my third night back, it happened again. Same time, same floor, same sick ritual. But this time I was completely ready and recording everything with professional-grade equipment. I captured crystal-clear images of faces, detailed shots of documents on the table, briefcases full of money being counted and sorted, and license plates from multiple camera angles in the parking garage. Most importantly, I got extensive footage of money changing hands and 3 different children being brought into the building through the rarely used service entrance. The children looked even younger than the previous ones I'd seen. 2 boys who couldn't have been older than 8 or 9, and a girl who looked maybe 10 or 11. They all appeared terrified and confused, clearly having no idea what was happening to them or where they were being taken. But as I watched the monitors that night, I noticed something that made my blood run completely cold with realization. Randy was there. My supervisor, the man who dismissed my concerns, systematically covered up the evidence and had me placed on psychiatric leave, was sitting at that conference table, actively counting money and sorting through photographs of children like he'd done it 1,000 times before. He wasn't just complicit in covering this up after the fact. He was one of the main organizers and coordinators of the entire operation. That's when I finally understood how they always seemed to know when police were coming, how evidence disappeared so quickly from supposedly secure servers, how witnesses were intimidated into silence so effectively. Randy had administrative access to all security communications, all police reports filed about the building, all employee records and background checks, all maintenance schedules and cleaning crew information. He could monitor everything I did, every call I made, every person I contacted, every move I made in the building. I immediately texted Agent Morrison using our predetermined coded system. Randy is involved. I'm completely compromised. Her response came back within seconds. Continue surveillance. Do not act differently. Help is coming. For the next 2 hours, I pretended everything was completely normal while Randy and his associates conducted their horrific business upstairs. I documented 3 different children being brought through the building that night. The 2 boys and the girl I'd seen earlier, plus what appeared to be an additional child who was brought in through a different entrance. I watched in horror as the children were photographed, measured, and examined like livestock at an auction. The men took notes in ledgers, made phone calls while looking at the children, and passed around what appeared to be catalogs or price lists. At one point, Randy himself came down from the 14th floor and walked past my security station. He smiled and waved like nothing unusual was happening. "How's the night going, Tommy?" he asked casually. "Quiet night," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Nothing unusual to report." Good, good, keep up the excellent work." As he walked away, I noticed he was carrying a briefcase that hadn't been in his office earlier. Whatever was happening upstairs was clearly wrapping up for the night. At exactly 5 a.m., just as the conference room was being systematically cleaned and cleared of all evidence, my radio crackled to life. "Hey, Tommy, need you to come up to my office for a minute. Got some important paperwork to go over with you." Randy's voice was casual and friendly, but something in his tone made my skin crawl with dread. This felt like a trap. "Copy that. On my way up now." I saved and uploaded all my recordings to the FBI server, then sent a quick text to Agent Morrison. "Randy wants to see me. Something's wrong." I headed upstairs to Randy's office on the 3rd floor. As I walked down the empty hallway, I noticed how unnaturally quiet the building was. Too quiet. Even the usual building sounds, ventilation systems, elevator motors, electrical humming, seemed muffled and distant. All the office doors along the hallway were closed, which was unusual. Normally, cleaning crews would be working in several offices at this time of night. Randy's office door was slightly ajar. I knocked and heard his voice call out, "Come in, Tommy." Randy was waiting for me with his typical friendly smile, but his eyes were cold and calculating in a way I'd never noticed before. He was sitting behind his desk with his hands folded, like a principal preparing to discipline a student. "Sit down, Tommy. We need to have a very serious talk about your future with this company." I sat down in the chair across from his desk, trying to appear calm while my heart raced. He closed the door behind me, and I heard the lock click into place with finality. "You've been quite busy tonight," he said, settling back behind his desk like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. "Recording things you really shouldn't be recording." My heart started racing, but I tried to maintain my composure and continue playing dumb. "I don't know what you mean, Randy. I'm just doing my job." Randy laughed, a cold, humorless sound that made my skin crawl, and pulled out a tablet computer. On the screen was live footage from my security station, showing my personal phone and FBI device sitting on the desk where I left them. "We've been monitoring all your communications since you came back to work," he explained matter-of-factly. "Did you really think we wouldn't notice federal agents sniffing around our carefully managed operation?" He stood up and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back, like some corporate executive giving a quarterly presentation to shareholders. "You've caused us some very significant problems, Tommy. My associates are extremely unhappy about the unwanted attention you've brought to our carefully managed and highly profitable operation." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do." He turned back to face me. "Agent Morrison, FBI Financial Crimes Division. Quite attractive, actually. You two seemed to have a lovely conversation at Murphy's Diner 2 weeks ago." My blood turned to ice. They'd been watching me the entire time. "Where are those children?" I asked, abandoning any pretense of innocence. "Safe and sound," he said with a casual shrug. "Being cared for by people who truly appreciate their unique value and unlimited potential." "You mean being sold to child predators and perverts?" Randy's friendly mask finally slipped completely away, revealing the monster that had been hiding underneath all along. "Don't be so naive and self-righteous, Tommy. These kids were throwaway cases anyway. Foster system failures, runaways, illegal immigrants nobody would ever miss or look for. We're giving their worthless lives actual purpose and meaning. You're sick monsters preying on defenseless children. We're efficient businessmen serving a lucrative market demand that exists whether we fill it or not. At least we're organized and professional about it instead of leaving it to random street predators who might actually harm the merchandise." He returned to his desk and opened the bottom drawer. I expected to see a gun, but instead he pulled out a thick legal document with multiple pages and official-looking seals. "Here's exactly what's going to happen," he said calmly, like he was explaining a simple business transaction. "You're going to sign this detailed confession admitting you falsified evidence and made false reports due to severe mental health issues and paranoid delusions brought on by job-related stress." He placed the document in front of me along with a pen. "You'll personally apologize to the FBI for wasting their time and taxpayer money, then voluntarily check yourself into a psychiatric facility for long-term treatment. Your family will be told you had a complete mental breakdown. And if I refuse to sign it?" Randy smiled and showed me his phone. On the screen was a photo of my apartment building taken from across the street, showing my exact window and balcony. "Your elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, takes her little dog for a walk every morning at exactly 6:30 a.m. Sweet old lady, lives alone, no family nearby. Yesterday she was telling me how much she enjoys our brief conversations when I visit the building." My blood ran cold. He'd been stalking my neighbors. It would be absolutely terrible if something tragic happened to her because you couldn't mind your own business and follow simple instructions. He swiped to another photo, this one showing my brother's house across town. "Your brother David has such a lovely family. Twin daughters, age 12, they walk to school together every morning. Very predictable schedule. You stay away from my family. That's entirely up to you, Tommy. Sign the confession, apologize to the FBI, and check yourself into the psychiatric facility. Your family stays safe. Refuse and, well, accidents happen to people who interfere with our business." That's when I heard them. Footsteps in the hallway outside Randy's office. But they weren't the normal sounds of security guards or cleaning crews. These footsteps were moving with military precision, spreading out systematically through the building. Randy heard them too. His confident smile wavered for the first time, replaced by confusion and growing concern. "What the hell?" The lights suddenly went out throughout the entire building. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing everything in an eerie red glow that made Randy's face look demonic. Randy rushed to his window and cursed loudly when he saw black SUVs surrounding the entire building perimeter, their headlights creating a ring of light around the plaza. "FBI, the building is completely surrounded." The announcement echoed through the plaza's PA system, amplified and crystal clear. "This is Agent Morrison, FBI. Everyone in the building, remain where you are and put your hands where they can be seen." Randy spun around, his face twisted with fury and desperation. "You set us up, you bastard." "No," I said, standing up slowly and backing toward the door. "You set yourselves up years ago. I just documented what you were already doing to innocent children." He lunged for his desk drawer, this time definitely going for a weapon. But the office door exploded open before he could reach it, the heavy wood splintering as the lock was completely destroyed by a battering ram. "FBI, hands where I can see them." Agent Morrison led a team of heavily armed tactical agents into the room, all wearing full body armor and night vision equipment. They moved with professional precision, weapons trained on Randy as he froze with his hand halfway to the drawer. "Step away from the desk immediately, Mr. Kowalski." Randy slowly raised his hands, his face a mask of rage and defeat. As they handcuffed Randy and read him his Miranda rights, Agent Morrison turned to me with obvious relief on her face. "You okay, Tommy?" "Yeah, I'm fine. But they mentioned moving other children tonight. Multiple locations across the city. We know. Your recordings gave us enough evidence for simultaneous coordinated raids across 6 different cities. Operations are happening right now in Atlanta, Phoenix, Seattle, Denver, Houston, and Detroit. We've been planning this for months." Through Randy's window, I could see tactical teams systematically clearing the building floor by floor with military precision. FBI agents in white hazmat suits were photographing evidence in the 14th floor conference room, while paramedics examined children who'd been recovered from hidden rooms throughout the building. "How many kids did you find tonight?" I asked. 17 so far from this location alone, including Isabella Chen. She's alive, Tommy. She's scared and traumatized, but she's physically unharmed. They're all going to be okay with proper medical treatment and therapy. Agent Morrison handed me a bottle of water and led me to a chair. The raids are continuing throughout the night. Early reports from other cities are showing similar results. We're estimating we'll recover over 100 children before this is over. I watched through the window as children were carefully escorted out of the building by FBI agents and paramedics. Each child was immediately wrapped in blankets and taken to ambulances where medical teams were waiting. "What about the people who were buying these children?" I asked. "We've been building cases against the buyers for months using undercover operations. Tonight's raids included simultaneous arrests of purchasers in 12 different states. We're talking about judges, politicians, business executives, clergy members, people in positions of trust and authority who were exploiting that trust to abuse children. The scope of the operation was staggering. This wasn't just a trafficking ring, it was a network that reached into the highest levels of society. Over the next several hours, I watched as more and more evidence was carried out of the building. Computers, files, photographs, financial records, boxes and boxes of evidence that would be used to prosecute dozens of people involved in the network. Agent Morrison explained that they'd been building this case for over 2 years, but my recordings had provided the final pieces of evidence they needed to move forward with confidence. "Without your courage to keep documenting what you saw, we might never have been able to prove the scope of this operation," she told me. "You saved lives tonight." The raids continued throughout the night and into the next day. By evening, the FBI had arrested 47 people across multiple states and recovered 83 children from various locations. The network was far more extensive than anyone had imagined, with connections to similar operations in Canada and Mexico. 6 months later, I testified before a federal grand jury in a heavily secured courthouse downtown. The trial lasted 3 weeks, with testimony from dozens of witnesses, including several of the rescued children who were old enough to testify. My surveillance footage became the cornerstone evidence that brought down an international trafficking network spanning 8 states and 3 countries. The recordings clearly showed the systematic nature of the operation, the involvement of multiple conspirators, and the commercial aspects of the trafficking. Randy and 12 of his associates received life sentences without possibility of parole. Patricia Meridian was arrested in Switzerland trying to access frozen offshore accounts containing over $50 million in trafficking proceeds. She was extradited to the United States and sentenced to 40 years in federal prison. The investigation revealed that the network had been operating for over 8 years and had trafficked an estimated 300 children during that time. Many of the victims were reunited with family members, while others were placed in specialized foster care programs designed for trafficking survivors. The children who were recovered all received extensive counseling, medical care, and therapy. Isabella Chen was eventually reunited with her biological aunt in California, who had never stopped searching for her. The little boy I'd seen that night, his name was David Rodriguez, was returned to his grandmother in Texas, who had been desperately searching for him for 8 months after he disappeared from a playground near his school. Agent Morrison visited me regularly during the months following the raids to update me on the case and check on my mental health. "We've now identified and rescued 127 confirmed victims over the past 5 years, she told me during our final meeting. "Your decision to keep recording and contact us probably saved dozens of lives and prevented hundreds of children from being trafficked in the future. I still work in security, but at a completely different company now with much better management, oversight, and ethical standards. The new company actually performs background checks on all employees and has strict protocols for reporting suspicious activities. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I just followed Randy's orders to forget what I saw and mind my own business. How many more children would have disappeared into that nightmare? How many families would still be searching for their missing loved ones? But I also know that evil only thrives when good people choose to do nothing. Those kids deserved someone to fight for them, to refuse to look the other way when confronted with their suffering. And sometimes that someone is just a night shift security guard with a cell phone and the courage to do what's right, no matter the personal cost." The last thing Agent Morrison told me still gives me chills when I think about it. We recovered detailed financial records and business plans showing they were planning to expand their operation to 12 new cities next year, with projections to traffic over 500 children annually within 3 years. "You didn't just save the kids we found, you saved all the ones they never got the chance to take." I sleep much better now, knowing that the monsters who haunted those surveillance monitors will never hurt another child again. But the experience changed me fundamentally. I can never again assume that the world is a safe place for children, or that the people in positions of authority and trust are actually trustworthy. I still check my locks twice every night and keep my curtains closed. I'm more aware of my surroundings, more suspicious of unusual activities, more protective of the children in my own family. Some images never completely fade from your memory. You just learn to live with them, knowing that sometimes bearing witness to evil is the first necessary step towards stopping it completely. The children I helped save are growing up now. Some of them send me cards on holidays, usually through the FBI's Victim Services Program. Knowing that they're safe, that they're healing, that they have a chance at normal lives, that makes all the nightmares and paranoia worth it. Because at the end of the day, protecting innocent children from monsters is the most important job any of us can do.